To start, here's some context. My wife and I had been trying for a kid for a while. We first decided that we wanted kids back during the pandemic, but decided to wait a few years for things to open back up first. We struggled for a long time, which made us a little concerned. We are both still pretty young as far as having a kid goes. Iris and I are both 27 and to our knowledge, neither of us had any medical issues that should be preventing us from having children. Things got a little rocky for a while. We got into a few fights, and I had to stay at my brother's a few times. But we still stuck with each other. Finally though, by some miracle, Iris got pregnant, and a good few months later, we found out we were having a baby boy. Things were looking up, and quite honestly, we were happy just to be having a kid. It felt like those years of stress and arguments had washed away over the past few months. Well, in hindsight, that is easy for me to say. I didn't have to go through the hard part of having a kid. Is that rude to think about? Not important right now and not why I'm here. We were here for the strange stuff. It started on the day my son was born. I was driving to the hospital from work, racing there after hearing Iris started having contractions. I was working a late shift at my family's restaurant when I got the call. My brother Nate said he'd cover my shift while I drove out, and I didn't waste any time. Or at least I'd have liked to, but a storm was raging overhead, and I wanted to be alive when I got to the hospital. The rain was hammering on top of the hood of my car. All I could see before me was the road, my headlights, and the occasional stop sign emerging from the dark. Sometimes I'd get a full view from the light of a thunderstrike. I was probably a good 10 minutes away when my gas tank was nearing empty. It wasn't too far, but I didn't want to risk breaking down in the storm. Luckily, there was a gas station nearby. I pulled in and stepped out of my car, taking shelter under the overhead while filling up the tank. That was when the first strange occurrence of the night took place. I felt a sudden gust of wind blow through the gas station. Nothing out of the ordinary for a storm aside from the sudden change in direction. However, the man who was now standing behind me did catch my attention. "Hello," he said as I turned to look at him. His voice was soft and slightly accented, sounded kinda Italian. I was caught a little off guard as I turned to him, and without any idea what to say, I just replied, "Hello." That was when I got a good look at him. He was dressed kinda like a cartoon detective. Big gray trench coat covering most of his body down to just above his ankles, around which he wore not shoes, a tied-up sacks. He was tall, near towering over me, but kept his chin to his chest, using his fedora to obscure most of his face. All I could see was his mouth and part of his neck. The skin was rough, almost like burns, while his mouth and lower face looked almost normal. The only notable exception was his cheeks, which seemed to have slits in them, almost as if someone tried to cut a Joker smile into him. Although it was clean, with no sign of scarring or cuts. Just 2 clean slits on either of his cheeks, just cutting off about a centimeter away from the edges of his mouth. We stood in silence for a moment, my attention only breaking from his when I realized I was still pumping gas into my car, and made sure to stop that before going over. I was half expecting to look back and see the man gone, but he was still there. Hadn't moved. I looked at him and simply asked, "Can I help you?" "No," and went to silence again. I then went to go pay the gas station attendant for the gas, but he placed a hand on my shoulder to stop me. His fingers were long, or at least they felt that way, as when I turned to brush him off, his hands had already moved and been placed in his pockets. "Look, I'm kind of in a hurry, so if you don't mind, I'm gonna go pay for my gas and get going," I blurted out. The man seemed unfazed as he shook his pocket, the sound of coins jingling inside them. "You should get going. Your wife needs you." I was taken aback. His odd appearance notwithstanding, I felt some mix of fear, but also anger. I questioned how he knew in my head, but the words that came out betrayed me as I simply said, "Is she okay?" He simply nodded, before pointing over to the car. The line of questioning already started. I continued, "And my son?" The figure once again gestured to the car, saying, "He will be well," and not too sure what was with me at that moment. I know how I felt, but my words and body were betraying me. I acted in a sense of false comfort despite feeling far from comfortable. I did what it said though. Even though it didn't tell me to do anything, I sort of just knew. As I got in my car and turned on the gas, before I drove off, I tossed a coin into my car through the cracked open window and simply said before I drove off, "Safe travels." I was 5 minutes down the road when whatever calming effect it had on me wore off, and I felt the anxiety slowly creep back in. It was only then I realized I don't think I saw their lips move. I kept driving. Once I arrived at the hospital, there seemed to be chaos all around. Doctors and nurses running from place to place. I knew there was a storm, but this once a big hospital and our town is rather out of the way. So it did strike me with some concern when a nurse approached me with a panicked look. "Are you here for your wife?" she asked assertively, to which I replied honestly with a yes. Gave her my wife's name, and she looked at me with what looked to be a sigh of relief as she led me to the room my wife was in. I'll spare you the gory details, but Iris was okay and our son Luke was healthy. 8 pounds 12 oz. More than I can say for the other mothers there that night. I feel blessed but somehow also guilty. The news didn't report on it long, and just passed it off as a tragic 1 in a million occurrence. 146 babies were born that night. All 2 mothers within 80 miles of the hospital. Even some who weren't due for another few months. Some even more. A good number didn't make it. Iris and I tried to focus on the positives. Even with that story hanging over our heads. We had a son. A beautiful baby boy. At the time I had so many dreams of what future he could have. So many possibilities. I still do. But now, once we brought him home, things seemed to cheer up. Most of the stuff people had warned me about when it came to having kids just didn't faze me. My mom gave me a few months of work to spend time with my son, while Iris was still on maternity leave while recovering. When they are still newborns, there's not a lot to do with them anyway other than keep an eye on them and make sure they are fed and changed. I was already used to late nights at work, so Sorry. I thought it was at the window again. I should probably explain that. Things started getting weird about 2 weeks after we brought Luke home. The storm had been raging for a long while and had only just cleared the night before. The first thing we noticed was Luke staring out our back windows. Always the back ones facing our backyard. At first, we thought he liked the color of our fence. It was a bright blue color and stood out against the gloomy environment. Over time, though, I realized his gaze was a lot more focused. One day I decided to sit with him as he was just laying there looking outside. I lay down beside him and looked out the window myself, and that's when I spotted it. He wasn't looking at our fence, or anything in the yard for that matter. He was looking into the trees behind it. I didn't know how he spotted it, especially since newborns are supposed to have horrible eyesight, but now that I was looking I could see it too. A bird. The grayish-brown feathers were shrouded by the shade of the trees and the gloomy remnants of the past storm. The details of its silhouette now so clear to me, but previously obscured by the shrubs and bushes. It was right there. I couldn't pin the kind of bird. Not that I know a lot about them anyway, but something seemed off. Its beak quivered and chipped in places, and its feathers, while colored pristine, were ruffled with some looking to have fallen out. Mange-riddled skin flickering through the gaps. Its stare was the worst part. It was unwavering, almost human with the intensity with which it looked at us. Rather looked at my son. I closed the curtains. My son just idly stared at them. This was 2 weeks ago now, and since then, I've not seen it move. I've gone outside to try and chase it away, but every time I step outside, it seems to just disappear. Part of me still believes it's just a strange animal, acting out some odd behavior. I've not told Iris. She has enough on her plate right now, and I'd rather not have her worry about the strange animal that seems to be stalking our son. I know for sure it's watching him now. I never see it move between spots, but it does change its perch when my son is taken to other rooms. Always in places where I can see through the window. I once called in animal control. They searched our entire yard, but not a trace. I even asked my brother if he could bring his dog over, which he did, but the dog didn't find anything. Earlier today, I think it got into the house. I'm assuming it was the bird at least. Iris was out with her friends on a much-deserved night off from parenting. Meanwhile, I was home looking after Luke. It was about feeding time for him. Not that it was scheduled or anything. More that he was crying a lot and I'd already worked through all the other options. I was in the kitchen, trying to work quickly so he wasn't left hungry for much longer. I had the baby monitor with me. I could hear him crying as I was screwing the cap onto his bottle. In hindsight, leaving my child unattended in this situation was a stupid move. But I guess at the time I was so used to having Iris around to watch him, it didn't occur to me that he hadn't been on his own until now. I was just about to walk back to our room where his crib was before I heard him stop crying, slowing my pace after a brief pause before heading into a casual walk as I heard him cooing. My relief that my son finally felt at peace for a moment was quickly snuffed out by what I heard next. A woman's voice came through the baby monitor, Soft and melodic, however, with a slight creak to it that comes with age. It said words in a language I don't understand. Something like, Kimisud or Petit Moo. I bolted down the hall to the other side of the house, throwing open my bedroom door to see the windows slid wide open. My son in his crib and something looming over him. Looking at it hurt, like starting at one of those checkered moving image illusions. I could see what was in front of me, but it left a deep sense of discomfort in my eyes. I lurched forward, feathered limbs stretching out toward me in a flash, alternating, moving closer to me to reach me. I could only concretely understand a few details. It was vaguely bird-like. More blue feathers, its stomach as engorged and swollen. It stared at me with human eyes as its fingered wings coiled themselves around my neck as it threw me out the door. My shoulders still hurts from the hard impact on the drywall. The thing looked down at my son once more, its elongated face mere inches from his as it spoke once more, whispering this time, before turning to me once more, the eyes on either side of its face. Faces? Whatever, it was looking right at me with human eyes. Finally, it spoke English, its finger extending out as it pointed directly at me. With an accented voice it said, "You are believing a lie, and have yet to acknowledge the truth." It took a step towards me, its form shifting as it stepped into the doorway. It put its bleeding mess of a face up to me, my head pounding just from looking at it from a distance. And now I was up close. It felt like my eyes were on fire, and my brain felt as if the mere image of this thing was trying to tear its way out of my skull. I wanted to fight back, throw a punch, charge it, but I couldn't even with a finger. Then crack. I snapped back to reality as I heard the sound of rumbling from the clouds above. A flash of light coming from outside as I felt the earth itself rumble. Even with the snap to my senses, I could feel my heart beating out of my chest. The beast's head snapped back, its body rotating with it shortly after before it began to scurry out of my house, its large body snapping in places as it slipped through the window. Once I saw it leave, I clambered to my feet and charged in, slamming the window shut, latching it up as I saw the being return to the woods behind my house. It's been a few hours since then, and I've not left Luke's side. I've texted Iris. She is on her way back home now. Once she gets here, we take Luke and head to my mom's place. I told her it was a break-in, and that I don't feel safe in my own home. I don't think she'd believe the truth. It came back to the window a few times since. It doesn't seem to be able to enter the house. Kinda like a vampire. It's gone now, though. I've not seen it in a couple of hours. No sign of it in the tree line either. I'll keep you guys updated if anything happens, but for now, I'm just gonna try and get away from here. It's been a month, and we've settled in at my mother's place well. Since we arrived, my mother has been doting on Luke nonstop, playing with him and buying him new baby clothes. I have told her he's barely a month old, and probably doesn't even realize what's happening around him. But I think she's just excited to be a grandmother. Not like Shed has a good chance with my brother or sister. Speaking of the latter, she stayed in her room while we were there. Helen spends most of her time at her girlfriend's place these days, so Iris and I aren't intruding on her space by living here. We see her occasionally when she pops back home to grab some fresh clothes or to have dinner with the family. Most importantly, there's no sight of that bird. I don't know if it's because we are in the city and there's no place for it to hide, or if it's because my mother's home is on the 5th floor of an apartment complex. I hate to think that it's the opposite, though, that it's somewhere here, and I've just not been able to spot it. I do try to push the thought from my mind, and I have found a few ways to distract myself. I've been hanging out with my brother a lot. He's the only one who I've told about what happened. I say told, more like my brother read an or and found my last story, and since then has been asking a lot of questions. Stuff like, are you on drugs? Or what kind of bird was it? Through his questioning, he figured out that the bird I was looking at was a peacock. A female one. To be specific, I only didn't recognize it as one because I didn't know only male peacocks have bright-colored feathers. Anyway, all of this to say, we were settling into something normal. I even started to feel comfortable taking Luke out in his stroller. God knows my mom likes to do it. I still tried to keep him indoors whenever I could, just to be safe. But sometimes we had to take him out with us. Like what happened recently. It was a few days ago. My mom was working at the family restaurant, and my brother was busy. He wouldn't tell me what with specifically. All I knew was it was something to do with hunting. I think he also mentioned some girl he was hanging out with named Luna. since we had no one to babysit while Iris and I went shopping. We took Luke with us, put him in the new stroller my mom got for him, and set off. I couldn't help but feel a looming sense of unease, looking around every corner and street as we walked to the mall. The trip, however, was uneventful, aside from stopping a few times because some old ladies were AWEing at the baby along with me, and Iris talking about moving closer to my mom, as far as she's aware, and still shaken up from the break-in. Eventually, she did ask, "Is everything okay, Alex? My name is Alex. Like, overall, I know getting attacked is messing with you, but you can talk to me. I'm alright. I just feel on edge. Like I can't shake the feeling something is wrong." Iris seemed to hold on to that for a second before responding. "Nothing is wrong, but I understand why you'd feel that way. I would be the same way in your shoes. It's not just what happened. It feels like something else. Like I'm being watched. A suspicion I feel, given past and current events, is well warranted." Iris, however, seemed to brush it off as paranoia, and I don't personally blame her. Once we entered the mall, we made our way around, picking out some essentials for my mom while also grabbing a few things for Luke. There was also a hair salon in the mall that my mom recommended to Iris, which she went to before we left. I sat there with the grocery bags on the seat beside me and Luke fast asleep in his stroller. I was gently rocking it back and forth, trying to keep him asleep despite the busy salon, and also to keep myself focused on a task and my mind off my paranoia. My attention was snapped away by the door opening, distracting me for a moment as I then found myself staring out the large glass window. For some reason, one woman in the crowd caught my attention. She was standing still in the center of the food court, barely a twitch or sway. She seemed off, though at the time, I couldn't pin down why due to the distance. She was wearing some sort of robe or dress, a loose silk, glistening slightly, her eyes wide with a stare that'd make someone with shell shock look like they were squinting. I watched her for a moment, noticing as people made attempts to avoid her without even acknowledging her, along with the fact that she was staring directly at me. Even through the crowds of people repeatedly passing by and blocking her view, she remained fixed on my position. Part of me was hoping she was some junkie, a junkie in fine silks, because that made sense at the time. She's got a staring problem, ain't she? The voice spooked me for a moment as I looked back, seeing an elderly black gentleman behind me. He was probably there waiting for his wife since I saw him come in with a woman earlier. "Yeah? Do you think she's looking at me?" I asked with some hesitation. Hell if I know. If I had to guess, I'd say drugs. I was thinking the same thing. But her clothes are too nice. He'd nod silently at my point. "I think it best to keep our distance on the way out. You never know what those people are like." I agree with him, though I would have said it less judgmentally. Before the conversation could go any further, and before I could dwell on the woman staring at me any longer, Iris walked over. She was ready to leave, and I wasn't all too eager to stay. I gave the old man a quick goodbye as Iris, Luke, and I left through the back end of the mall. I did peer back. The woman's gaze was following us. Once we left the mall, we headed straight home. I was focused on just getting there, on getting my wife and son to safety. After we had been walking for what felt like forever, even though we were barely a few blocks away from the mall, Iris tugged on my shirt to get my attention. "I don't want to make your paranoia worse, but that lady's been following us for a few blocks now," Shed told me, her voice filled with concern as she edged closer to me. I know. She was staring at me in the mall as well. "She doesn't look okay. Let's just try to shake her. She's not going very fast, so it shouldn't be too hard." Iris took a deep breath before nodding. We then spent the next 15 minutes going down different routes, across streets, even going in circles a few times. And each time we looked back, she was still there, never too close, always just far enough as to where we can barely make out specific details. She never really sped up either, or at least when we looked back. She always seemed to be walking slower than we were. Eventually, and to our luck, we turned back, and she was gone. We stayed off path for a little while longer. She was still gone. Once we were sure she was not following us anymore, we went back to my mom's place. I kept a close eye on the windows the rest of the day after that, and that brings us to today. My mom wanted to have a family dinner since I was staying with her. My sister's girlfriend was out of town, and Archie had returned from his hunting trip. She figured it'd be perfect given the whole family was free. I wasn't opposed. God knows I needed the distraction. Even my father joined us. It wasn't a surprise. Even after the divorce, he and my mom were still on good terms. Most of the family sat around the dinner table, aside from Helen, who was sitting over on the couch keeping Luke company while Iris and I were talking with my mom and dad about embarrassing childhood memories. Archie was occasionally chipping in with things he remembered while slipping bits of food to Concrete. Yes, that's his dog's name. He went over to the kitchen in the middle of a story about our parents catching him smoking weed. After a few minutes, he came back in and leaned into my ear to whisper, "Can I talk to you in the kitchen for a moment?" UHM. Yeah? Excuse me. We head into the kitchen, my brother closing the curtain that separates the dining room and the kitchen as he looks at me with a serious expression. The thing you should know about my brother is he is not a serious man. So seeing him look at me like that had me concerned even before he said, "There's a woman outside, standing in the middle of the road, and she's looking right up at our window." What? I quickly reply in confusion as I pushed past into the window before feeling his hands grab me for a moment. "Hey, don't just look. What if she sees you? She's already seen you." "I know, but I'm not the one who was attacked by a peacock monster." All right. I'll just peek then." He seemed okay with that, at least, as he stepped aside. I moved over to the window, being sure to keep myself out of direct view as I peered down. It was her, same blue silk, the same 1,000-yard stare from eyes that seemed too big for her skull. She was standing there right in the middle of the street, the traffic just passing by her. Occasionally, a car came close to clipping her, but she just remained still, looking up towards the window as no one around her seemed to pay her any mind. Shit'd mutter under my breath. "What? I saw her the other day. She was following me. Luke and Iris from the mall yesterday." Oh shit. We stared at each other for a moment, both of us trying to decide on our next course of action. I was just about to look out the window again before a knock at the door broke our tense silence. We both snapped our heads to the door, then back at each other as we heard our mom yell out, "Someone answer the door." I nodded Archie as we slowly moved towards it, the knocking echoing through the house again as we stand on either side of it. I take a deep breath and move to the center of the door, looking through the peephole. I then let out a long sigh and opened the door to an Uber Eats driver, who was delivering some ice cream my sister had brought for dessert. What happened next made me feel like an idiot, as I go to place the ice cream in the fridge, which put me in clear view of the window I was trying to avoid. I looked down and saw that not only was that woman still standing there, but she now had company. Two more, one on either side, both different looking but dressed identically. One was a lot taller and slender. The other was a bit more broad-shouldered. Once they spotted me, I saw the three of them make a beeline for our door, followed by three more identically dressed women that I hadn't spotted before. Fuck, I say almost involuntarily as I run to the door, making sure it's locked as I turn to face Archie. They saw me. "They're coming." "Hey, there's more of them." 6 I counted. Without hesitation, Archie would say, "I know what to do," as he ran over to the sink, nearly yanking the door off its hinges and pulling the full handgun from behind the pipes. I'm not too into guns, so I'm not sure about the specific model, but it was some kind of revolver. He began loading it quickly. "Mom's gonna kill you for having that in her house. You know." "Yeah, but you're happy I have it." He was right. Admittedly, if there was any time that having a nutcase for a brother would be a good thing, and sure this was one of them. I saw him aim at the door as the faint light from the hallway that slipped through the peephole and under the door faded away, blocked by what I can only assume was the small group of stalkers. They begin to hammer at the door, their fists slamming against the wood like sledgehammers as Archie and I stare intently at it. My attention was ripped away as Iris walked in, screaming out a quick yelp as she saw my brother's gun. I quickly move in, stepping away from the door and swapping with Archie as I try to calm her down. "What is going on? Why does your brother have a gun? Who's at the door?" "You know the woman who was following us the other day?" Shed nod. "Shed outside the door with like 5 other women. I don't know what she wants, but she ran right into the building the moment she saw me." "Okay. Why does Archie have a gun?" "Just call the cops." "We will, but we don't know if they are armed. Just go back into the living room, grab Luke and call the cops." The door would hammer again as I saw my terrified wife look between me and the only barrier between us and the things outside. She took a deep breath and ran off into the living room. I could hear her telling my parents that they needed to hide. My mother sounding concerned, asking if everything was okay. My dad, on the other hand, always had a good intuition. I heard him stand up from his chair with more energy than a man's head and start ushering my mom and Iris to the other side of the living room. I could hear my sister, though I'm pretty sure I heard her go into the bathroom earlier. Turning my attention back to the door, I saw Archie give me a nod before leaning against the door, keeping the gun close as he iced through the peephole. I saw a visible look of disgust run across his face as he saw them, but he remained focused. All right, you fuckers. You better back the fuck off. I'm armed and not afraid to show. His attempt at a threat was quickly cut off, as one of the woman's arms burst through the door, ripping through it like cheap plaster, as I saw the gangly arm coil itself around my brother's neck, slamming him into the door as it attempted to choke him out. It seemed bony, with some areas having strange bulbs and growths, and the skin having a rough and streaky texture, almost as if covered in rows of scars or stretch marks. My brother struggled to free himself. As I watched his eyes start to bulge from his head for a moment, I saw him bash the handle of the gun into the thing's elbow, hearing it make a slight squeal as it collided with soft flesh. He then turned the gun towards the door, pointing the barrel right against the wood. Before pulling the trigger, movies never prepare you for how loud a gunshot is, but the ringing in my ears at least gave me something to focus on to steel my nerves a bit. The shot, however, seemed to have no effects. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen counter and ran over to the door, stabbing it right into the thing's upper arm. I must have nicked or cut into something as I cut into its soft flesh, and its grip on my brother loosened in a snap, the arm dropping before being yanked through the doorway. Once he was freed, and we were almost certain that door was not going to hold, we ran into the living room with the others, past the dining table and over to the rest of my family. Iris, Luke and my mother being shielded by my father, who was body blocking the three of them. Where did you get a gun? My mom screamed out to Archie as Luke was crying. Iris doing her best to comfort him. Before we could explain to my parents what was happening, we heard the loud thud of the kitchen and our being knocked off its hinges. Concrete barking from his dog bed as we heard the odd, squelching footsteps of those things enter the apartments, making their way to the living room and surrounding us. This was my first time getting a good look at them up close. Their skin looked fresh, pink, and soft in places, like a baby animal. The only texture was around their joints and the pits of their bodies, which were coated with rough, scar-like stretch marks. And I was wrong before. Their eyes were not too large for their head, but their eyelids were too small, stretched back and barely covering the whites of their eyes. The teeth were small and pulled apart between the gums. The hair patchy, though not as if parts had fallen out, but as if it hadn't grown out completely. All of them were wearing the same blue silk robe. The one that followed us stood front and center, a pool of red dripping down her chest as a gunshot wound dark in the left side of her chest. The hole seemed to have expanded beyond what a round of that size should have left, almost like someone poked a hole in stretched plastic. They looked through us, their pale eyes staring directly at Luke. Each of them opened their mouths with strained breaths, all of them speaking in unison, their voices an echo of high-pitched, screechy words. "Give us the child." "No," I shouted back, clutching the knife tighter. "Give us the child. You're not taking my son." "Yeah, get lost," Archie shouted along with me, darting his aim between each one of these hastily grown humans. They didn't take to the threat at all, pushing forward and encroaching on my family. Archie fired another shot, clipping one of them as we saw blood pool from its hip. The gunshot drowned out by my mother's screaming, the cries of my son and my own heart beating out of me chest. The walls felt as if they were closing in, and my hand was trembling, but something kept me standing there, stood up and ready to throw down with these things. I clenched my fist around the knife's handle, my knuckles locking up and straining from the grip. They were probably a few feet away from me, and a few more from my family. Even though I needed to, I had to. With a crash, my sister, who had emerged from the bathroom when noticed, slammed a chair over the back of one of their heads. Its skull cracked open like a watermelon as it slammed to the ground, its body making a wet thumping sound as it hit the hardwood floor. The remaining 5 turned for a moment as Archie shot again, getting a lucky shot off on another one as it dropped down. My sister pounces on another one, though to no avail as it easily bats her into the dry wall, knocking the wind out of her. I charge at the same one with my knife, plunging it in the thing's ribs to no reaction. Two of the remaining ones, while my siblings are caught up, bolt for Luke, charging straight into my father, who acted as a human barrier between them and my son. He swings his fist into one of them, hard knuckle connecting with soft fleshy jaw, knocking it clean off. But it did not stop in its assault. The other one leapt on my father, gripping his arm and snapping the bone down the middle. The audible crack followed by a pained groan catching our attention. Archie snapped back, raising the gun for a moment before instantly realizing that was a bad idea and that he could hit someone he didn't intend to. My sister was still catching her breath as I tried to wrestle the knife from the creature's ribs on the side. Then, trying to pry my mother away from Iris and Luke, I let go of the knife before I felt a bony hand covered in stretched out flesh slam me down to the floor, hitting my head against it as I felt like everything was knocked out of frame. Through my daze, I looked, reaching an arm out towards my son. The sirens were the next thing I heard, rapidly approaching and growing in volume. For some reason, that worked to spook them, as without wasting a second of precious time, they shot themselves towards the door, some dripping blood, one with its jaw angling from one side of its face, two are standing up with heads caved in and shambling out of the apartment like zombies. One of the neighbors must have called the cops. Hell, with all the screaming and shots, I'd imagine the entire building called the cops on us. Overall, my family is okay. My dad's arm was broken cleanly, so it'll heal fine even at his age. My sister only had a couple of fractures on her ribs. I was concussed but recovered surprisingly fast. My mom and Iris were pretty shaken by the events but were unharmed. They never got to Luke. The police ruled it as a home invasion. They believed it may be related to the break-in at our house. After we dealt with all the legal stuff and the police investigations, they concluded it must have been a group of women left vengeful after the hospital incident and targeted us being our son being born with no complications. The strange appearances brought on by drugs or stress. DNA evidence of the creature's blood backed up this theory, as it matched with medical records of one of the mothers who were at the hospital that night and lost their daughter. Not that it explains how they walked off gunshots without moving, or how one with their entire head caved and got up and walked away. It also doesn't explain what that thing was that attacked me in my own home a month ago. For now, though, we've replaced the door and have been on high alert for the last day or two. It is just me, Archie, Iris and Luke in the house now. My mom is staying at my dad's place, and my sister is still staying at her girlfriend's, and not sure what to do next, especially after receiving a letter in the mail. It was a card with an address on it. Looking it up on Google Maps, I found it was a café, one that's not too far from my mom's apartment. Also inside the envelope that it came in was a stony silver coin, old and withered, with a woman's head on one side, wearing a reef crown, and a winged horse on the other side. The same kind that the man at the gas station gave me. I guess the simple way to ask this is, what should I do?